Okay, let's unpack this. History often points to certain moments that, well, they don't just mark the end of an era, they fundamentally create a new one. We are diving into one of the great um, catastrophes, really, of the classical world,
Mm.
the Siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. This was the decisive, bloody culmination of the first Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire.
It really was a military operation that changed everything. Our mission today, I think, is to try and cut through maybe 2,000 years of theological reflection and myth and focus instead on the immediate brutal realities, the precision of the Roman military machine under Titus, the destruction of the Second Temple, and the, well, astonishing political and religious transformation that was immediately forced upon the survivors.
Yeah, and when you look at the timeline, the sheer agony of this event is just palpable. Our sources confirm this wasn't quick. It was a massive, grinding undertaking. How long exactly?
It lasted 4 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days, from mid-April, April 13th, right through to early September, September 8th, 70 CE.
Wow, 4.5 months. And that long period, it wasn't just constant warfare in the traditional sense, was it? It sounds like an escalating spiral of starvation and, crucially, internal collapse.
That's exactly right. And to really appreciate the level of devastation, you first have to understand what Rome was actually fighting for. Jerusalem by far the most famous city of the East.
Right. It was a thriving, renowned metropolis. And for the time, it was huge, covering about 450 acres.
Yeah, nearly twice the size of the modern Old City. It was the absolute spiritual and political epicenter of the Jewish world, especially, when it swelled with thousands upon thousands of pilgrims for festivals like Passover.
And it was built tough, built to withstand a long siege.
Absolutely. The city had significant natural defenses, protected by these deep ravines, the Kidron and Hinnom valleys. And those natural defenses were heavily augmented by 3 separate rings of massive fortification walls.
3 walls. And we know the third wall, the outermost one, that was completed sort of in a desperate rush right as the revolt began.
Exactly. In haste is the phrase often used. Strategically, on paper, the city should have been able to endure a siege for years. It was incredibly well fortified.
Okay, so here is where we hit the core tragic insight of the event, I think. And it's a difficult truth. While the walls were strong, let's say the will or the unity inside was broken, Rome arrived to find the city essentially tearing itself apart.
Right. They found it in the middle of a crippling internal civil war. It was destroying itself from within.
So Titus was handed a massive strategic advantage, really.
He was. Now, we have to be careful not to diminish the power and effectiveness of the Roman army, of course. But yes, this internal conflict was a gift to them. You had these 3 rival Jewish factions, led by John of Gischala, Simon Bar Giora, and Eleazar ben Simon, fighting intensely, viciously for control of the city.
And the most unbelievable part of this infighting, they destroyed the food.
They did. In the midst of this chaos, they deliberately destroyed the critical storehouses of grain, oil, wine, the very supplies they needed to survive a long siege.
It's almost unfathomable.
Yeah.
Destroying the very provisions that were their only ticket to survival.
It is a moment of profound self-sabotage. And it was compounded, tragically, by the fact that the population had swollen dramatically.
Right, the Passover pilgrims.
Exactly. Thousands of pilgrims and refugees from the surrounding areas had come into the city for the festival, and then they became trapped by the advancing Roman forces.
So, more mouths to feed, less food, and internal war. I just must have known this.
Oh, certainly, and he used it. His force was immense. We're talking a minimum of 48,200 soldiers.
That's huge. What kind of units are we talking about?
Well, you had 4 full legions, the 5th Macedonica, the 10th Fretensis, the 15th Apollinaris, and the 12th Fulminata. Highly disciplined veteran troops. Plus auxiliary forces, and notably a strong force of Arabs, as Josephus puts it, who had their own long-standing antagonisms with the Judeans. This was an overwhelming, meticulously organized power designed to crush resistance utterly.
And their tactics weren't just about breaking walls, were they? Titus seems to have been a master of psychological warfare, too.
Very much so. He would stage these enormous synchronized parades. Imagine cavalry and infantry, all in polished armor, marching in perfect formation just outside the walls. It was a deliberate display, ensuring that everyone inside could see the sheer, inexhaustible might of Rome arrayed against them. designed to demoralize.
And then came the physical terror.
Yes. The cruelty that followed was horrifying, and it was calculated. It wasn't random violence. It had a purpose.
To break the defender's spirit.
Exactly. To terrorize them and punish anyone attempting to flee. Roman forces captured fugitives trying to escape the starvation and crucified them.
Crucified them. In view of the walls.
Yes, within clear sight of the defenders. Josephus claims the scale was staggering, sometimes over 500 crucifixions a day.
500 a day.
To the point where they actually ran out of wood for the crosses, and finding suitable trees became difficult around Jerusalem. It was methodical terror.
That strategic brutality outside.
Hmm.
It must have mirrored the absolute desperation inside the walls, the famine you mentioned earlier.
It became almost unbearable to reconstruct from the accounts. As the grain ran out, prices soared to impossible levels. People were reduced to scavenging in sewers for scraps, eating leather, dung, anything.
And this is where that chilling story of Maria from Perea comes in.
Yes. It's recorded by Josephus, perhaps an extreme example, but it illustrates the depth of the horror. After her home and supplies were looted by the internal rebel factions, she reportedly, in desperation and madness, roasted and consumed her own infant son.
Oh my God.
And when rebels, drawn by the smell of cooking, burst in expecting to find hidden food, they found the half-eaten remains. Even they, the hardened fighters, were reportedly shocked and retreated, trembling.
It shows the total collapse of everything, societal norms, basic humanity.
A horrific illustration of the starvation's peak. All this suffering, this internal chaos and external pressure, it ultimately culminated militarily when the Romans finally breached and captured a key position, the Antonia fortress.
Right, the Antonia. Why was that specific fortress so pivotal?
Because capturing the Antonia fortress, which overlooked the Temple Mount, immediately shifted the Roman focus. It took them from fighting in the outer city areas directly onto the most sacred ground of all. It gave them the high ground and, critically, a direct staging area for the final assault on the temple itself.
And that leads us directly to the defining moment of the entire siege, maybe one of the defining moments of Western history, the destruction of the temple.
Yes. We even know the traditional date, the 9th or 10th of Av in the Jewish calendar, which falls in July or August. The accounts say a Roman soldier, against orders according to one source, hurled a burning piece of wood, a firebrand, into one of the temple's chambers. And it ignited the massive ancient structure.
Okay, but against orders. This is where we hit a major historical debate, isn't it? Was the fire accidental? Or was it intentional Roman policy?
This is one of the most significant questions for historians, and it's something for you, the listener, to really grapple with. Our primary source, Josephus, tells a fascinating, maybe convenient story.
Josephus, the Jewish historian who was there but later worked for the Romans.
Exactly. He claims Titus rushed to the scene, shouting orders to extinguish the fire. Josephus insists Titus wanted to preserve the magnificent structure, viewing it as a potential ornament of Roman rule. He presents the final destruction as an act of battlefield chaos, of insubordination by Roman troops driven by, greed for gold and simmering hatred for the Jewish religion.
But that account, it just doesn't quite sit right with many modern scholars, does it? I mean, if Titus was such a famously strict commander known for discipline, why would he suddenly lose control of thousands of his troops at the absolute climax of the campaign? It seems unlikely.
Precisely. Scholars strongly question Josephus on this. They point out, as you said, he was writing under the patronage of the Flavian dynasty, Titus's own family. He had a very strong motive to, let's say, sanitize the general's image, to absolve him of the deliberate destruction of such a famous holy site.
So what's the alternative view?
Well, other later Roman and Christian historians offer different perspectives. Sulpicius Severus, for instance, writing centuries later but possibly using earlier sources now lost to us, suggested Titus deliberately ordered the destruction.
Why? What would be the motive for deliberate destruction?
The argument Severus presents is that Titus believed that destroying the temple was necessary to eradicate the religions of both Jews and, interestingly, the early Christians, by eliminating their central foundational cultic site. Military necessity combined with ideological purpose.
So the thinking among many modern historians leans towards intentionality, or at least Titus accepting it as a necessary part of the conquest.
Yes, the consensus view now is that it was almost certainly intentional, or at minimum, ideologically motivated and accepted by Titus as a necessary military and political action. Remember, the temple wasn't just a place of worship. It functioned as the national treasury. It was the symbolic heart of the rebellion, the center of national identity. Eliminating it was a decisive psychological and ideological blow for Rome. It served their purpose.
And the immediate aftermath of the fire starting.
Chaos.
Utter chaos and catastrophe. Mass killings and looting immediately followed the breach. The Roman soldiers, enraged by the long siege and resistance, showed little mercy. We have these incredible specific details from the sources, like the sheer amount of gold and silver seized from the temple treasury and melted down in the fire was so immense.
That it affected the economy nearby.
Exactly. It actually caused the gold standard in the province of Syria to depreciate by half because of the sudden influx of looted wealth. That gives you a sense of the scale.
Incredible. And the people inside. Priests who refused to surrender, who perhaps stayed praying on the Temple Mount, were hunted down and executed on the spot. It was brutal.
So with the temple, the symbolic heart, gone, Titus then turned his attention to the rest of the city.
He ordered its systematic leveling. His goal wasn't just conquest, it was erasure. He wanted to wipe this rebellious metropolis completely off the map, to make an example of it.
Utterly ruthless. Did anything survive?
He was ruthless in this pursuit, yes. He ordered almost everything demolished, but he deliberately left 3 massive towers standing part of Herod the Great's palace fortress.
Which ones were those?
Phaesal, Hippicus, and Mariamne. Josephus tells us Titus left them specifically as a monument, a testament to Roman military prowess, to show future generations what kind of city Roman arms had conquered. And he also left a section of the western wall standing to protect the garrison he planned to leave behind, the Legio ex Fretensis. But the rest flattened.
Josephus famously wrote that a future visitor would struggle to believe a city had ever even existed there.
He did. And what's truly fascinating and sobering is how completely the archaeological record backs up this account of systematic destruction. This isn't just ancient text, we have physical proof.
What kind of proof? What have archaeologists found?
Well, think about the massive stones from the Temple Mount's retaining walls, particularly the Western Wall area. Archaeologists have found huge carved stones lying exactly where they fell on the street below, pushed over by Roman siege engines 2,000 years ago. You can see them today.
Wow. Physical scars.
Physical scars. And they've excavated areas like the burnt house in what was the upper city, the wealthy district. They found layers of ash, everyday objects like kitchen tools, pottery, inkwells, and heartbreakingly, the skeletal arm of a young woman pinned under collapsed debris, likely killed while trying to escape the fire and destruction.
Just frozen in that moment of terror.
Exactly. And the stories of the final desperate survivors are literally embedded beneath our feet in Jerusalem. There's evidence of refugees hiding in the vast network of drainage channels beneath the paved streets, trying to escape the Roman soldiers rampaging above.
Hiding in sewers.
Yes, clogging the great Herodian urban sewer system in a final, desperate attempt to escape the purge. It's grim confirmation of the textual accounts.
So the fighting ends, the city is razed. But the war wasn't officially over for Rome until they celebrated back home, right? The triumph.
Correct. The war didn't just end with the last pockets of resistance being cleared. It culminated in a massive triumphalist spectacle back in Rome in 71 CE, the famous Flavian Triumph, celebrating the victory of Vespasian and his son Titus.
And this was pure imperial propaganda on a grand scale.
Absolutely. It was Rome's chance to showcase its absolute dominance, to justify the war, and to solidify the new Flavian dynasty's legitimacy. They paraded the most sacred spoils taken from the temple, the huge solid gold menorah, the table of showbread symbols, instantly recognizable throughout the empire, displayed before enormous crowds in Rome.
And captives, too.
Oh yes, 700 select Jewish captives, probably chosen for their physique or former status, were marched in chains. And the captured rebel leader, Simon Bar-Giora, was ritually strangled or thrown from the Tarpeian Rock during the procession, adhering to that brutal Roman tradition, the victorious general displaying his mastery over the enemy's life and death.
And this victory wasn't just celebrated with a parade, it was immortalized, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In stone and on coins.
It was. We have the famous Judea capta coinage issued extensively by the Flavians. These coins typically showed a mourning female figure representing Judea, seated beneath a palm tree, sometimes with a bound captive nearby. A very clear message. Judea is conquered, subjugated.
And there's a connection to a very famous Roman landmark.
Yes, and it's a powerful one. Our sources and economic logic suggest that the spoils of this war, the vast amounts of gold and silver looted from Jerusalem and the temple, were substantial enough to help finance the construction of the Colosseum in Rome.
So the foundation of Rome's greatest architectural marvel, the Flavian Amphitheater, was literally built, in part, with the wealth plundered from Jerusalem's destroyed spiritual heart.
That seems to be the case, a stark connection. And of course, the most enduring monument is the Arch of Titus, standing in the Roman Forum today.
Which famously depicts those very soldiers carrying the temple spoils.
Exactly. The inner reliefs show the triumphal procession, Roman soldiers carrying the menorah, the table of showbread, the very items paraded in 71 CE. It's a potent visual summary of Roman victory over Judea.
It's incredible visual evidence. But what strikes me is that while the physical city, the temple, the political entity were annihilated, something else happened. This destruction forced one of the most profound transformations in religious history.
That's the crucial outcome, isn't it? The physical destruction was almost total, but it paradoxically led to immense religious innovation and survival.
How so? What fundamentally changed?
Well, the destruction of the Second Temple meant the end, forever, of the sacrificial worship system that had been the absolute center of Jewish religious life for centuries. It also meant the end of the hereditary high priesthood based in Jerusalem. The entire structure of the religion had its core ripped out. Jewish identity had to adapt completely, or simply vanish.
And it adapted. This is the birth of Rabbinic Judaism as we know it.
This is the great intellectual and spiritual leap into Rabbinic Judaism, yes. The focus had to shift. It moved away from priests performing physical sacrifices in one specific sacred location to a decentralized, portable spiritual system centered on Torah study, communal prayer in synagogues wherever Jews lived, and critically ethical acts of loving kindness, gemilut chasadim.
And the story of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is sort of the anchor for this transformation, right? The escape from the siege.
It's the foundational anecdote passed down through rabbinic tradition. It tells us he foresaw the destruction and, realizing physical resistance was futile, had his disciples smuggle him out of the besieged city in a coffin, pretending he was dead.
A risky move.
Extremely. He then made his way to the Roman camp. Some accounts say he even predicted Vespasian would become emperor and received permission to establish a new center for Jewish learning in Yavna on the coast.
Yavna became the new hub.
It became the crucial incubator for this new phase of Judaism, and Ben Zakkai's teachings defined the era. There's a famous exchange where his disciple, Rabbi Joshua, is distraught over the temple's destruction, lamenting, "Woe unto us! The place where the iniquities of Israel were atoned for is destroyed."
How could they achieve atonement without sacrifices?
Exactly the question. And Ben Zakkai's response was revolutionary. He comforted Rabbi Joshua, saying, "My son, do not grieve. We have another atonement as effective as this. And what is it? It is acts of loving kindness." The physical temple was gone, but the means of connecting with the divine, of repairing the world, had to be internalized and made accessible everywhere through study and ethical living.
So the rabbinic leaders, reflecting on this catastrophe later, they had to find a theological explanation, didn't they? Why would God allow Rome to conquer his holy city and destroy his temple?
Absolutely. They couldn't simply blame the overwhelming external power of Rome, theologically speaking. They had to look inward. It was a necessary process for spiritual survival.
And their conclusion?
Their conclusion, repeated throughout rabbinic literature, was profound and self-reflective. The destruction wasn't ultimately due to Roman might, but due to the internal sins of the Jewish people themselves. Specifically, baseless hatred, sinat anam.
Baseless hatred, that internal factionalism we talked about earlier.
Precisely. That self-destructive infighting. It wasn't just a historical factor. It became the core theological explanation. It was a way to understand the trauma through internal failure, suggesting that if they corrected that internal flaw, redemption could come. The Talmud famously illustrates this with the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, a tale of a petty social snub at a banquet escalating through pride and resentment, ultimately leading, in the story's logic, to the Romans being invited in and the temple's destruction. It's a parable about self-inflicted wounds born of hatred.
Wow. Meanwhile, what about the emerging Christian movement? How do they interpret the fall of Jerusalem?
For early Christians, the destruction was interpreted very differently. They saw it largely as the fulfillment of prophecies attributed to Jesus, predicting the temple's downfall. It was also often viewed as divine punishment against the Jewish authorities who rejected Jesus, marking a clear and final theological separation, a parting of the ways between nascent Christianity and the Judaism that was now being reshaped at Yavna.
So if we try to connect all these threads, pull it together. The physical manifestation of Jewish sovereignty, the city, the temple, it was utterly destroyed. But the identity itself, it didn't die. It survived by transforming, becoming a religion focused intensely on memory, text, and practice, adaptable to life outside the land outside the temple walls.
That's the essential paradox and the enduring legacy. Annihilation led to adaptation and survival through radical transformation.
And the echoes of 70 CE, they're not just historical footnotes, they resonate powerfully even today, don't they?
Everywhere in Jewish life, the destruction is still mourned annually on the fast day of Tisha B'Av, the traditional date of the calamity. It's recalled symbolically even at moments of greatest joy, like when a glass is broken under the canopy at Jewish weddings, a deliberate act to remember the destruction of Jerusalem even amidst celebration. And of course, the centuries-long declaration, next year in Jerusalem.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a final provocative thought for our listeners to contemplate.
All right, try this. I consider the Arch of Titus again, standing there in Rome. It was constructed by the Flavian emperors, as we said, to celebrate the violent crushing of Jewish independence, the eradication of their central cultic practice, a monument to Roman dominance.
Right, the ultimate symbol of defeat for Judea.
Yet today, the most prominent image carved into that Roman triumphal arch, the menorah, being carried away as loot, has become the powerful, universally recognized emblem of the restored modern state of Israel.
Oh, that's quite the reversal.
Isn't it?
Oh.
It suggests a profound historical irony. While empires like Rome rise and inevitably crumble, certain spiritual anchors, certain symbols of identity and hope can endure. They can even outlast the very monuments built to celebrate their destruction, taking on entirely new meanings across millennia. Something to think about.
A profound contradiction indeed, captured in stone. This was truly a world-changing event with echoes that continue to shape our present. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Siege of Jerusalem, 70 CE.